Look, I'm just gonna be real with you about this whole mess because honestly, I still can't believe how everything went sideways. I'm Paige, I'm 29, and I thought I had life figured out until it all blew up in my face. So I'd been living with my boyfriend for 3 years. Let's call him Jake, in his house. Yeah, his house, which was kind of annoying, but whatever. Free rent, basically. I work for this company, doing office stuff, nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills. The thing is, I'd been getting so bored with Jake for months. He's one of those guys who thinks being stable and reliable is an actual personality trait. Like, congratulations, you remember to pay the electric bill and take out the trash on Thursday mornings. Meanwhile, I'm literally dying of boredom watching him play the same stupid games every single night after work. But here's where things get interesting. There's this guy at work, we'll call him Blake, who's the complete opposite of Jake. He's got this confidence thing going on, actually makes me laugh, has some edge to him instead of just being this predictable robot. The only problem? He's engaged to this girl from another department. Basic as they come, always posting these cringy couple photos with captions like, "my person," and heart emojis everywhere. Gagged me. But I could tell there was something between Blake and me during our lunch breaks, and when we'd stay late working on projects together. The way he'd look at me when he thought nobody was watching, make these little comments about how his fiancée doesn't really get his sense of humor. Classic stuff, right? But it was working on me. I started making more effort at work, staying late more often, making sure I looked good, you know how it goes. Jake never even noticed because he's glued to his games the second he gets home. I'd walk in wearing a new dress or with my hair done different, and he'd grunt hello without even looking up from his screen. Meanwhile, Blake would compliment my outfit or ask if I'd done something different with my makeup. The frustrating part was that nothing was happening fast enough. Blake would flirt, and we'd have these intense conversations about life and relationships, but he never made a real move. His wedding was still months away, and I was getting impatient, just waiting around hoping something would happen. That's when I realized I needed an actual plan. I couldn't just sit there hoping the universe would magically fix my boring life. I needed to create the right situation where Blake would finally dump his basic fiancée, and I could get out of my dead-end relationship with Jake. But the timing had to be perfect. I needed to make sure I had somewhere to go, and Blake's place seemed like the obvious choice once he was free. I started dropping hints about how unhappy I was at home, how Jake didn't appreciate me or even really see me anymore. Blake ate it up, started talking about how we both deserved better than settling for people who didn't understand us. But I knew I had to be smart about this whole thing. I couldn't just cheat and hope for the best like some desperate woman. I needed guarantees that this was going somewhere real. So I decided to get strategic about the whole situation. I started paying attention to everything. Every time Jake annoyed me, every sweet thing Blake said, every sign that his engagement might not be as solid as it looked from the outside. I was building my case, you know? Like if anyone ever questioned my decisions later, I'd have proof that I was totally justified in everything I did. Blake started opening up more about his relationship problems. His fiancée was apparently super controlling about money, always wanted to know where he was going and who he was with, didn't like his friends. Sound familiar? I made sure to be the complete opposite, cool, understanding, fun to be around. When he'd complain about her, I'd just listen and nod sympathetically. Maybe throw in a, "you deserve someone who actually gets you" here and there. Meanwhile, at home, I started pulling back from Jake. I mean, why waste energy on someone I was planning to leave anyway, right? He'd try to plan these boring date nights, and I'd find excuses to get out of them. He'd want to have these deep talks about our future together, and I'd change the subject or claim I was too tired from work. Honestly, it felt kind of good to have some power for once instead of just going along with his predictable routine all the time. The breakthrough came when Blake mentioned that his fiancée wanted him to delete social media because she was uncomfortable with his female coworkers commenting on his posts. That's when I knew I had my opening. I started liking all his posts, commenting cute, supportive things, making sure I looked absolutely amazing in any group photos from work events or office parties. His fiancée definitely noticed. I could tell because suddenly she was showing up to pick him up from work way more often, giving me these looks like she knew exactly what was up. Good. Let her feel threatened. That's what happens when you don't appreciate what you have and try to control everything instead of just being a better girlfriend. I even started posting more couple photos with Jake on social media just to throw people off the scent. Let everyone think we're totally solid while I worked on my real plan behind the scenes. The funny thing is, Jake actually seemed happy about the extra attention on Facebook. He had absolutely no idea I was just covering my tracks while I figured out my exit strategy. By this point, I was spending way more time thinking about Blake than my actual relationship. I'd plan my outfits around seeing him at work, find excuses to collaborate on projects together, stay late, hoping we'd finally have that moment where everything would click into place. But I was getting impatient, waiting for him to make a move. His engagement party was coming up in a few months, and I knew if that actually happened, it would be so much harder to break them up afterward. Everything changed at this company team-building thing we had to go to. It wasn't anything fancy, just this mandatory retreat at some resort about an hour away. Most people were planning to drive back the same day, but Blake and I both happened to book rooms for the night. Total coincidence, obviously. His fiancée couldn't come because she had some family obligation, and Jake didn't even bother asking if he could join me, just assumed I'd rather go alone. Which I absolutely did, but still, he could have at least pretended to care about what I was doing, you know? The daytime stuff was boring, work activities and team-building exercises, but that night at the hotel bar, everything shifted between us. Blake was drinking more than usual, getting frustrated because his fiancée had been texting him constantly asking what he was doing and who he was with. I played it perfectly, sympathetic but not pushy, just the right amount of, wow, that sounds exhausting to deal with. When he walked me back to my room afterward, I could feel the tension crackling between us. This was it. This was finally my moment. But then he just said goodnight and went to his own room like nothing had happened. I was so frustrated I could have screamed. Here I am, looking absolutely amazing, being the perfect woman, and he's still playing it safe with his boring life. That's when I realized I needed to be way bolder if I wanted this to actually happen. Around midnight, I went to his room with some excuse about needing help with a work thing we were supposed to present the next day. He let me in, and we ended up talking for hours about everything, our relationships, our dreams, how we both felt completely stuck in our lives. By the time the sun was coming up, we'd finally crossed that line. It was everything I'd imagined and more. He was so different from Jake. Passionate, actually present, and paying attention to every word I said instead of half listening while thinking about something else. When we got back to work that Monday, everything was different between us. Secret looks across meetings, private messages throughout the day, finding excuses to be alone together in conference rooms or staying late when the office emptied out. It was thrilling, in a way my relationship at home had never been. Not even in the beginning, but Blake was still engaged, still going through all the motions of wedding planning with her. I needed him to make a choice, and fast. I started pushing a little harder, talking about how we both deserve to be happy, how life's too short to settle for someone who doesn't really see you. But I also had to be careful not to seem desperate or clingy like his fiancée. Meanwhile, at home, I was basically completely checked out. Jake would try to talk to me about his day or suggest we do something together on the weekend, and I'd just give him these basic responses while texting Blake under the table. He'd want to plan some romantic evening, and I'd claim I was exhausted from work projects. Which technically wasn't a lie. All this sneaking around was definitely exhausting. But it was also addictive. The danger of it, the secrecy, having someone who actually wanted me the way Blake did, instead of just taking me for granted. Jake had gotten so comfortable in our relationship that he barely even noticed me anymore. Blake made me feel alive and exciting again, like I was worth pursuing. After weeks of sneaking around, I knew something had to give. Blake was getting more anxious about his wedding getting closer, and I was getting tired of living this double life where I had to pretend everything was normal at home. That's when I came up with what I thought was the perfect plan. I would wait for Blake to break up with his fiancée first. Let him be the one to end his engagement so I wouldn't technically be the other woman when we got together officially. Then, once he was free and clear, I would leave Jake and we could finally be together properly, without all the sneaking around and guilt. It was foolproof, really. I just had to be patient and help Blake see that his engagement was obviously a huge mistake. I started pointing out all the ways his fiancée was completely wrong for him. When she'd text him during our lunch dates, I'd make these little comments about how clingy and insecure she seemed. When he mentioned wedding planning stress, I'd suggest that maybe all that drama was a sign they weren't actually compatible. I was basically like his relationship therapist, except I was guiding him toward the conclusion I wanted him to reach. The beautiful part was that everything I said was totally true. They really weren't right for each other at all. I was just helping him see what was already obvious to everyone else. Meanwhile, I had to figure out my exit strategy at home with Jake. I couldn't just disappear overnight. I had stuff at his place, we had shared bills and accounts, all that complicated relationship stuff you accumulate over 3 years. Plus, I needed to make sure Blake was really committed to leaving his fiancée before I burned all my bridges. So I started creating distance without making it too obvious what I was doing. I'd pick fights over stupid little things, act annoyed when Jake wanted to spend quality time together. Basically make him think our relationship was naturally falling apart on its own. That way, if he ever questioned me later about what happened, I could honestly say we'd been having problems for months before I met someone else. The tricky part was timing everything perfectly. I needed Blake to break up with his fiancée before I left Jake, but not so far in advance that he might change his mind or end up finding someone else in the meantime. I also had to make sure Jake wouldn't do anything crazy when I finally told him it was over, like change the locks on his house or throw all my stuff out on the lawn. He owned the place after all, so I needed to be strategic. I started being extra sweet to Jake sometimes, just to keep him off balance and confused. I'd have these random moments where I'd act like the girlfriend he remembered from when we first got together, then pull back again the next day. It kept him hoping things would get better between us instead of realizing they were already completely over in my mind. During this whole time, Blake and I were getting more and more serious about our future together. We'd spend hours on the phone after I went to bed, making plans for what our life would look like once we were both free. He'd talk about places he wanted to take me on vacation, things he wanted to experience with someone who actually understood him. It was everything I'd been dreaming about. But his fiancée was definitely starting to get suspicious about something. She'd show up at our office more frequently, ask him more detailed questions about his day and who he'd been working with. A couple times she even approached me directly, asking about specific projects Blake and I were collaborating on, like she was testing whether our stories would match up. I stayed calm and friendly during those conversations, but inside I was starting to panic a little. If she figured out what was really going on before Blake had a chance to break up with her properly, everything could fall apart and ruin my whole plan. That's when Blake finally told me he'd made his decision. He was definitely going to end the engagement, but he wanted to wait until after their engagement party, since it was already planned and paid for. He didn't want to humiliate her by canceling it at the last minute, but he promised he'd tell her privately afterward that he couldn't go through with the wedding. It seemed perfect to me. I just had to wait a few more weeks, and then I'd finally be free to start my new life with someone who actually appreciated me. Everything was going to work out exactly the way I'd planned it. So Blake's engagement party comes and goes, and I'm waiting for him to follow through on what he promised me. But then days go by, then a whole week, and he's still engaged like nothing happened. Every time I brought it up at work, he had some new excuse. His fiancée was stressed about a project deadline, her family was visiting from out of town. It just wasn't the right time to have such a serious conversation. I started realizing that maybe Blake liked having the best of both worlds way more than he actually wanted to leave his safe, predictable life. Maybe all his complaints about his fiancée were just him venting, not him actually planning to do anything about the situation. Meanwhile, I'm stuck at home with Jake, still pretending everything's totally normal between us, while I'm dying inside waiting for my real life to start. But then, something happened that changed everything, and made me realize how badly I'd miscalculated this whole situation. Jake started acting completely different, asking way more questions about my day at work, wanting to know why I was always on my phone, suggesting we spend more quality time together on weekends. It was like he suddenly remembered he had a girlfriend and decided to start paying attention again. At first I thought maybe he was just going through some phase, but then he did something that made my blood run cold. He suggested we go to this work happy hour event that I'd casually mentioned was happening. The same happy hour where Blake would obviously be, with his fiancée. I tried everything to get out of it, making up excuses about being tired or having other plans, but Jake was being all persistent and romantic about the whole thing. "I want to meet the people you work with," he kept saying. "I want to be more involved in your world." It was like he picked literally the worst possible time to start caring about my life outside our relationship. The night of the happy hour, I was completely on edge. I spent forever getting ready, trying to look good but not too good, if you know what I mean. When we got to the bar, I immediately scanned the room for Blake. He was there with his fiancée, and they actually looked happy together, which was honestly kind of shocking. She was laughing at something he said, hanging on his arm, and for a second I felt this stab of jealousy that really surprised me. My boyfriend started introducing himself to everyone, being all friendly and social. It was actually annoying how charming he could be when he put in effort. People seemed to genuinely like him, which made me feel weird because I'd been thinking of him as this boring loser for months. When we finally got introduced to Blake and his fiancée, I could barely breathe. I introduced Jake, and I swear Blake looked guilty as hell. His fiancée was being super sweet and friendly, asking Jake about his work, complimenting him on his shirt, and Jake was eating up all the attention, being his usual nice guy self. But I could see Blake watching me the whole time, and I knew he was thinking about all the things we'd done together, all the plans we'd made for our future. The worst part was when his fiancée started talking about their wedding planning, how excited she was about everything, how helpful Blake had been with all the details. I wanted to scream. This was the same guy who'd been telling me for weeks that he was going to end things with her, that he couldn't wait to start over with someone who actually understood him. But here he was, nodding along, playing the perfect fiancé like nothing had ever happened between us. After about an hour of this torture, I claimed I had a terrible headache and basically dragged Jake home early. He kept talking about how nice everyone seemed, how much he'd enjoyed finally meeting my coworkers. "That Blake guy seems really cool," he said, and I nearly lost it completely. If he only knew what that cool guy had been doing with his girlfriend for the past 2 months. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept thinking about how comfortable Blake looked with his fiancée, how natural they seemed together. Maybe I'd been completely kidding myself about this whole thing. Maybe he never had any real intention of leaving her, and I was just the exciting distraction while she was the one he actually wanted to marry. The next week at work, everything imploded in the worst possible way. I was trying to act normal and professional when Blake pulled me aside into an empty conference room. I thought he was finally going to tell me he'd broken up with his fiancée over the weekend, but instead, he said we needed to stop whatever this thing was between us. He was getting cold feet about the wedding, he said, but he thought that meant he should focus on his actual relationship instead of blowing up his entire life. I just stared at him like he was speaking a completely foreign language. After everything we'd shared together, everything we'd planned for our future, he was choosing her? I didn't handle it well at all. I started crying right there in the conference room, asking him how he could just throw away what we had, like it meant nothing. He got all uncomfortable and started backing toward the door, saying maybe we'd gotten carried away, maybe it was just the excitement of something new and forbidden. That's when I realized I'd been completely played. While I was planning my entire future around this guy, he was just having fun with me. He never actually intended to leave his perfect little fiancée for me. I was just entertainment until reality set in. I was so angry and hurt that I did something incredibly stupid. I went back to my desk and sent him this long, emotional email about how he was making the biggest mistake of his life, how we were obviously meant to be together, how he was going to regret this decision forever. I poured my heart out completely, telling him exactly how I felt and describing what I wanted our life together to look like. It was desperate and pathetic, but I sent it anyway because I couldn't believe this was how everything was going to end after all my careful planning. That's when everything went completely wrong in ways I never could have predicted. Apparently, Blake's fiancée has access to his work email account. She saw my message, and suddenly everyone in the entire company knew about our affair. HR got involved immediately. There was this horrible meeting, and I ended up getting fired for unprofessional conduct and workplace harassment. Blake got to keep his job, of course, because he claimed I had pursued him aggressively and he'd tried to stop it, which is complete garbage, but whatever. He threw me completely under the bus to save his own career and his precious engagement. Meanwhile, word somehow got back to Jake about what had happened. Not from me. I was still trying to figure out how to tell him everything, but from someone at his gym, who apparently knows someone from my company. Small town, right? So I came home that day to find Jake sitting at the kitchen table with this expression on his face I'd never seen before. He knew everything. Not just about Blake, but about how long it had been going on, about my whole plan to leave him, about all the lies I'd been telling him for months. He didn't yell or cry or beg me to explain myself. He just told me very calmly that I had exactly 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live. He was so controlled about it, which somehow made it feel worse than if he'd completely lost it and screamed at me. I tried to apologize, to explain that it wasn't supposed to happen this way, that everything had just gotten out of control. But he was already completely checked out emotionally. He wouldn't even look at me while I was talking. So now here I am, 3 months later. I'm unemployed, living in this tiny studio apartment that costs half my unemployment check every month. Blake won't return any of my calls or texts. I think his fiancée made him block my number completely. My few work friends won't talk to me because the whole situation is too messy and embarrassing. And Jake, my ex-boyfriend, has apparently already started seeing someone new. I saw them together at the grocery store last week, and she looks exactly like the kind of woman who would never do what I did. She's probably boring and predictable, but she's also probably loyal and trustworthy, which I guess is what matters to him now. I keep thinking about how different everything would be if Blake had just followed through on his promises to me, or if Jake hadn't found out about everything so soon. I had a real plan, and it should have worked perfectly. But somehow everyone else ruined it by not playing their parts the way they were supposed to. Now I'm starting completely over at 29, and honestly, I'm still not sure how I ended up being the villain in this whole story when all I wanted was to be happy with someone who actually appreciated me. But I guess that's just how things go sometimes, when you try to take control of your own life, instead of just settling for whatever you're given.